Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited about sharing this information with you. I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Andy Kirchhoff. He is a licensed counselor at Revision Christian Counseling. He earned his master's in counseling from Missouri Baptist University, has 27 years of full-time K-12 teaching experience, is a caregiver for an adult with profound special needs, and an author of the book Critical Connection and the blog Growing Up Well. I have the agenda up here just for those of you who like to know times. And so we will have time for some discussion afterwards. We're going to have a few people come and share testimonies, and then we'll have a short break before session 2 begins. Help yourself to refreshments.
Okay, I'll introduce my family. It's not the largest picture, but it's okay. So my wife is Julie. She'll actually be coming in a minute to bring me all the handouts that I'm going to give you later in the presentation. There she is right now, actually. It's my wife, Julie.
Yay, Julie!
So Julie is my best friend. We've known each other since we were 12 years old. And so we just had our 28th anniversary. We have a son. Our oldest son is 23. He lives in Nashville with his new wife. They just got married in May. We're really proud of him. That's him and his wife on the left, Kelsey Kay. Catherine is our daughter. She was a year and a half younger than my son. So when Catherine arrived, changed everything. Changed our whole world. She has severe cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and intellectual disabilities. She is a special kid. She has incredibly emotional, loving, kind connections with people. She is also really emotionally volatile, and she's difficult. She has a ton of physical needs and intellectual needs and emotional needs, and it doesn't seem to get a lot easier. It's perpetual. She's 21, and she's now not able to go to school, which is a huge transition for us. So we're dealing with that right now, and my wife's building a new reality for Catherine. So our caregiving continues to change as life changes, as Catherine changes. So what we're going to do today is talk a lot about how to care for yourself. What I'm going to talk about is how to care for yourself as a caregiver. And it's something that I assume I don't need to do a whole lot of convincing that that's a good idea. I'll do a little bit of convincing that you're going to need to take care of yourself. I just want to start with saying that disability is normal. Like almost everyone gets disabled at some point in their life. And almost everyone cares for someone who's disabled. So it's actually a normal thing. It's just a normal part of a very broken world. And that worldview helps me a little bit because I know that everyone's lives are broken. Every person's family is broken in some way. The creation was subjected to frustration. The whole creation has been groaning. And that's in Romans. So every aspect of human experience is stained with brokenness, but it's also stained with beauty. And I see that with my daughter so much every single day. You see the brokenness, you feel it. You also see the beauty. Her smile, her infectious ability to connect with people. She's a unique, special kid. There's glory in her, there's glory in me, there's glory in every one of us. That we're all made in the image of God. And everyone deserves human dignity, and that includes yourself as the caregiver. One thing I think it's important to recognize is that the degree of difficulty of parenting a special needs child is just higher, it's harder. My best friend has 2 special needs kids, and his life is hard. It's very hard, and we're always, we're able to understand each other because we both understand it's just more difficult. And it's important to know that every person suffers. It's just that we got to deal with a little extra suffering. And the good news is that God knows all that, and that Jesus suffered. No one suffered more than him. And so he's with us, and he knows, he gets it. So I think that's important to recognize. But he also, this is kind of an interesting little piece of a story where Jesus cared for the caregivers too. This is when there's a blind man from birth. The disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." So I think this illustrates that Jesus is trying to say, look, don't blame the parents, don't blame the child. This is a broken world, and I feel like that's supporting us. It's not our fault. We didn't do anything wrong, and the child didn't do anything wrong. But the good news is that there's a lot of real peace in this very, very broken world. So we have a lot of anxiety, a lot of worries about our kids and ourselves and our families. But we can put our anxieties on Him. We can cast our anxieties on Him, and He cares for us. He actually really does care. And this is the part that took me kind of a long time to learn, is that every one of us matters. My daughter doesn't matter in a special way more than my son matters. And my daughter doesn't matter more than my wife matters. My wife doesn't matter more than I matter. That took me a while to really fully get that and to understand that. But when I did, it helped so much to go, my daughter's human, and so are we all. And her needs are special, but she's not this superhuman person. She's not more or better than I am. And Jesus cares for me every bit as much as He cares for my daughter. And He knows the numbers of the hairs on my head, and He cares. He knew me from the beginning. So I take a lot of comfort in that. That I matter no more and no less than anyone else. And my daughter matters no more or no less. And so that's why we advocate for her, because she matters. And it's easy for the world to forget about her. The thing is, it's also easy for us to forget about ourselves. And that's a real problem, because we can't sustain that life where we're just always giving and never taking care of ourselves. And as a Christian, sometimes we think, well, that's kind of selfish. That doesn't feel right. That if I care for myself, that's somehow wrong. And we get it in a lot of different little ways, because a lot of people are very selfish, and so they need to be told, quit thinking about yourself. But then a lot of people are actually very selfless, and that's not what they need to hear. They need to be told, no, you matter. You really do need to take care of yourself so you can care for others. And so caring for the needy is just as important as caring for God and caring for self, and that there's plenty of love to go around. I can care for my daughter and my wife and my son and myself, and even a bunch of clients, and my neighbors. And love's not a zero-sum game. There's not this limited amount of love. It's unlimited. So with God, I can actually love all these people, including myself. And that's an important thing. It's a hard thing, but it's possible, because love is a multiplier. I just saw this on LinkedIn. It's a local therapist named Gina Berkmeyer, and she said, putting other needs in front of our own is called selflessness. But if it costs you your mental, emotional, or physical health, it's called people-pleasing. And that's a trauma response. That's not a healthy response. And I think that's an important thing to realize, is that you need to take care of yourself so you can care for others well. It's not selfless. It's other-centered. It's not a panic thing. I don't take care of myself in panic. I take care of myself proactively, because I need to plan to be able to do this next year and the next year and the next year. And we are responsible to our children. We're responsible, but here's the hard part, is sometimes we become hyper-responsible. We become so responsible for our children's needs or our spouse's needs that we over-identify with them, where we lose ourselves. And the idea is that God's actually the healer, we're the caregiver. And there's a difference. God's responsible for my daughter, God's responsible for my son, and I'm supposed to be the steward, the leader, the helper, the caregiver. But these are God's children, and this is God's family. It's not even really mine. I'm a steward. I'm renting it. I'm a renter, so to speak. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of responsibility on us as caregivers, but ultimately, our child, their life, their survival, their thriving is dependent on God, not just us. And I kind of like the word co-authoring of life. We're really kind of co-authoring the life of our family, and I think that's important. It's not just us, it's not just God, we're doing it with Him. And life is going to be hard no matter what, and a life with a special needs child is going to be even harder, and that's right, that's normal. You can't get past it. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. And what's interesting is our brains are wired for this. Like, we're ready for stress. And so a lot of times our brains react automatically. They just do things and make choices for us. If we're not making a choice, sometimes our brain just automatically makes a choice. And so when we sense some kind of threat, some kind of problem, we have a stress response. And it's generally good, sometimes not so good, but generally it's a good response. We probably going to need to either fight, flight, or freeze. These are automatic responses. So the fight is, I'm angry about this, I'm going to fight this, I'm not going to be forced, I'm going to be very active, I will prevail. And sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need to fight for our child, advocate for our child in the school system or whatever. Sometimes in the moment, we can't really fight, or it's not appropriate to fight, and so we can kind of run away. We can procrastinate. We can say, I don't like this, I'm out of here, I'm checking out, I'm not going to fight, I need some space right now. And that can be perfectly appropriate. Sometimes your brain automatically chooses that, sometimes it's the right response, sometimes it's not the right response. Freezing is similar to fleeing, but it's more like, I go for walks a lot at Creve Court Park, and there's a lot of deer there. And you'll see it all the time. The deer just freezes. And you walk right by it, and you don't even see it because he's frozen. And that's that mammalian response to survive, which is, if you freeze, sometimes the threat just passes you by, and you're safe. And no one even sees you, and it's okay. And so sometimes your brain chooses this, which is to just freeze in the moment, and then the threat just passes. It goes right on by, and you're safe. So our brain will choose one of these three things, but we can also intentionally choose one of these things. So if we sense the threat and the stress, sometimes we can, from our true self, we can pick one. But our brains are wired for this, and different parts of the brain, I'm not going to get too much into this, but we have this rational part of our brain in the front. It's the meaty front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, and that's the really logical, high-end thinking, higher-end rational thinking. But when we sense a threat, it's the inner brain that's going to choose for us. And so what we really want to do is be able to use our whole brain. We don't want to just be automatically triggered into some kind of response that isn't good for us or for others. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how to manage your emotions, how to manage your inner life. And the goal is not to eliminate stress or eliminate anxiety or any emotion, but we want to be able to manage it and work with it and not be wrecked by it. And so a lot of what I'm going to give you is skills for how to do that. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, it's a great movie, not just for kids. And the concept is that you really need to be cooperating with your emotions, not just letting them run the show. And so you listen to them and you work with them. It's not about controlling, but it's a little bit of control. It's a managing sort of control. And we get this, we grow in a more ability to handle emotions. Our window of tolerance can get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we can tolerate more stress, we can tolerate more anxiety. And the idea is that you need to be very aware of your own window. And some days, your window's very, very small. You're so exhausted, you're so stressed out. and you know you just have a tiny little window of tolerance. Okay, so that's good to know, and then you can realize I need help, I need more help, I need to be more compassionate to myself today. So that's something to definitely be aware of. Whoops. I think hold on. Let's see here. Okay, sometimes our window of tolerance is so small that we've got to just put it on the shelf. Like, I don't have time to be scared right now. I don't have time to be sad right now. And it's not time, it's more tolerance. I don't have the tolerance to be emotional in this moment. You know, you might be at work, you can't cry right now, or you can't be angry right now and express that. So you got to be aware of how are you doing in the inside, and part of that is what can I tolerate right now in this moment. And sometimes you need to just put it on the shelf for later, but don't forget about it. Because what a lot of us do is we put it on the shelf and then we forget about it. We're actually kicking it into a storage closet, and we're never really going to deal with it. And that can be a problem. So sometimes you can deal with it right now. Sometimes you're going to have to put it on the shelf for later, after work, or maybe tomorrow morning. Don't go too long though. Don't stuff it and forget about it. It's really important to be able to be aware of what emotion you've got and then deal with it as soon as you can. And there's been a couple of studies, but one in particular that said that an emotion that's truly felt only lasts 90 seconds. So in many cases, you can literally go to the restroom and feel it for 90 seconds, and that helps a lot. And you know, when you're doing that, when you're riding the wave of the emotion, you're noticing your physical sensations. How am I feeling? Because your body will respond first. Your body will tell you something's happening. And every person has a different physical sensations for different emotions. You know, but you might notice your heart racing, or your face gets hot, or your chest feels tight, or your hands get clammy. There's all kinds of tells. There's kinds of things that tell you that something's not right. And then if you can name the emotion, okay, I'm scared. And then breathe deeply and just let it happen. Embrace it. Allow it. And when that's happening, just be curious. Is it on my...
Kind of adjust, wiggle it a little bit there. Wiggle the wire.
Wiggle a little bit.
Or I'll get you a different one.
We can just do a hand mic if you want.
Got it.
Needs to turn it off. Maybe turn it off.
Yeah. I'm like DT here on text, so. I appreciate you and I'm so far beyond.
Do you have a handheld?
No.
Talk louder.
All right, talk loud and then I'll get you something else.
Okay. My teacher voice is a little raspy this morning. So when you're under stress and you realize that you've got an emotion going on, your goal is to name it and to notice it, feel it, be curious about it. And then once you're feeling it and that 90 seconds goes by, kind of get in your body, like feel your fingers, feel your tongue, make sure you're in your body. That's an important part of it. And you'll notice that it'll pass. So I see this with some of my clients who get real emotional. They'll start feeling it, and you can see it. It's physically happening, and then here it comes, the wave. And it's amazing how brief it is. It's intense. And if I were to look at my clock, it'd be 60 seconds or 90 seconds. It really is very, very brief. And then it starts to kind of dissipate. And that's a good thing. It's a really good thing. But it's scary because it feels a little out of control in a moment. And so what I'm going to do today is give you a lot of skills, a lot of different things you can do to manage your inner life, to care for yourself. And it's also your outer life. You know, it's more than just your inner emotions. It's your thoughts and your body also. Now, the Bible, as you know, has a lot to say about anxiety, a lot to say about managing your inner life. I mean, prayer works. Prayer matters. Prayer is a way of tapping into your inner life, fellowship with others, being gratitude, being thankful, counting your blessings. Serving others actually helps you manage stress. Working on your patience and sometimes just waiting for the stress to pass. Meditating on scripture, resting. Nature. Walking in nature is one of the best things you can do to manage your stress, to manage your inner life. So the best talks and the best processing that we can do is in nature with a friend, talking about something important. And so there's a lot that the Bible has to say, but I'm going to give you a lot of stuff kind of from science, things that we've discovered.
I trust Anna.
Let's see. If I get this right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's right. Okay. Maybe that doesn't seem right.
Does that feel right? Matt,
Testing? No.
how do you put this on yet?
We go over the years.
I know.
It's the top of the ears. This way. The hook's on the top of the ear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
Nice. Okay. Is that better? Maybe? Okay. Just keep talking. All right, so if you don't have a packet yet, raise your hand. Does everyone have a packet? Okay. These are some of the best handouts that I've used with clients for a long time now. And we'll start this first page. So when you have an emotion, you're trying to notice it, feel it, and let it happen. But we can do more than that. You can name the emotion.
Sorry, can you just switch your password?
So we're gonna name the emotion, and if you want, you can even put it on a scale of 1 to 10. How intense is this emotion? I'm feeling a little scared, or I'm feeling a lot scared. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 10. I'm terrified. That's a good thing to do. You're processing it, what's actually happening. And the more you name it and feel it and process it, the less scary it is. But what we can do is find out, okay, what is this emotion telling us? What is this fear telling me? It's information coming from your nervous system, coming from your soul, coming from God. And so if you can see emotions as information rather than something scary that I really want to not deal with, then you can respond to it with, apparently I need something. And then you can respond with, well, I can do something about it. And not every emotion is going to be all that helpful. Some emotions are kind of errant, but it's still information. So it's not all just random. Your emotions come from somewhere. And so the goal is to be able to name it. I feel shame. I'm ashamed of myself. Okay, what do I need? Maybe you need to talk to your spouse. Maybe you need to pray. Maybe you need to do some journaling. But you need something to deal with that. And then what can I do? Well, maybe you are guilty of something, but there's this shame that you need to separate out. But you can respond to the guilt, you can respond to having done something not right, and you can fix that, and then you can feel better about yourself because you've redeemed that problem. So this is something that I keep this with me a lot, just because it reminds me Emotions are information, because I wasn't raised that way. I wasn't raised to believe that emotions were healthy and helpful and informative. I was raised to believe that emotions were scary and should be not dealt with unless they're happy. Positive emotions are good, negative emotions are all bad, and that's just a lie. It's not true. And so I'm going to be a healthier person if I can pay attention to my emotions. And this is one way to do that. The next page is the feelings wheel. Because
It's gonna be a
Now that might be working.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey!
Good. Okay, the feelings wheel
Be the president, right?
is so helpful because most of us don't have the right words for emotions. Most of us have a general idea. Well, I'm frustrated. I'm ticked off. Okay, that's anger, but maybe there's a better word for it. And when you can pick the right word, it feels better. It helps you process. I can't tell you how many times I've handed this to a client and said, okay, pick some words, because they're stuck, especially teenage boys. They're just stuck. They have no idea what's going on. The other part of it is many of us have complex emotions. Most of the time, actually, our emotions are more than just one of these things. It's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of these things bunched together. And then that helps us process what's going on. Because a lot of times we know we're angry, but we don't know that we're also a couple of other things. And that's the information that's really helpful. As an aside, especially for men, anger tends to be the primary emotion that just sort of covers everything, but there's more important emotions underneath there. So, yeah, you're angry, but what else are you? What's under the anger? And that's really important. Okay. Now, you can do this with your kids also. This is called emotion coaching. This is something you do with your kids, you also should do with yourself. You're coaching yourself with emotions, which is what I've been describing. Now you need to help your kids do that as well. It's harder with kids because they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex to deal with. So they're going to be raw emotion, and they're not going to have words for it. It's tougher for them to manage emotions. But you can help them. You can be their prefrontal cortex for them. You can be their nervous system for them. And you can help them and say, okay, what are you feeling? Name it. Okay, well, tell me why. What's going on? And then they tell you the whole story. And it comes out. And the tears come. And what you're doing is you're connecting with them and you're trying to be with them in that emotion and help them think about it a little bit. What you don't want to do too much, though, is explain it away. Like, don't use your brain to stifle their emotion, because that's something where we do it to ourselves. We also do it to children a lot, which is, well, you shouldn't feel that way because, and you give them five reasons why they shouldn't feel that way. Instead, be curious. Say, okay, this emotion's information, what's it telling us? So you sit there, you connect with them, you listen to them, and you're going to name those emotions, and then you're going to help them try to find some solutions. The other part of this is sometimes you have to create some limits on them, because if they want to throw and hit and wreck things, get in a fight with someone over it, no, we're not going to allow your anger to do sinful things. We're not going to allow your anger to hurt other people. So there are limits to this. Again, emotions, you're trying to process it. What's the information? What can we do that's redemptive and good from all this information we're getting from our emotions? Okay, now, we're going to shift a little bit into your body, into relaxing your body, because that's a super important part of dealing with stress. Because a lot of times stress is basically trauma, and trauma is kept in your body, and you need to get it out, you need to deal with it. So, we're using our brains a lot to process our emotions, but we really also need to use our bodies. And also our brains will get really tired. We'll exhaust our thinking. And so we need to have some rest. We need to have some relaxation. Especially with stress, because stress will burn out your system, unless you give it the rest it needs. So we're supposed to be in like this rhythm with our nervous system where we go hot and cold, you know, where we're able to get amped up to fight something or to flee something. But we also need to be able to relax and rest and digest is what they call it. So in this handout, I'm not going to go over all of it, but it explains the autonomic nervous system. You've got the sympathetic part and the parasympathetic part. And the sympathetic part is designed to amp up, get excited, fight, flight, be on task, be focused. Right now, I am focused. I am in the sympathetic nervous system. I'm kind of amped up because this is my job. This is the pinnacle of my day right now. And so I'm alive, I'm awake, I'm alert. I need to be that. Now, later today, I'm gonna rest. I'm gonna need to relax and come down off of this. And that's the parasympathetic, which is, okay, take a big deep breath and let it out. And there's so many ways to do that, and many of us are not good at this. We're not good at calming down, resting, allowing things to settle in our heart and in our heads. But you kind of need to do it from the outside in. You need to relax your body. So you got to be aware of where the stress is. Usually it's shoulders or temples, or everyone has a place where they store their stress. Everyone's a little different. A lot of mine's in the neck, so I got to stretch my neck and kind of be aware of it. It's really important to work from the outside in, where you're aware of your body, aware of your emotions and the connection, and then you're trying to actually calm your body down, relax the muscles in your body. I've heard it said, and I believe it, that you can't have stress or trauma in a totally relaxed body. In other words, if every muscle in your body is relaxed, you're not stressed. And so what you're trying to do is get there. You're trying to relax your chest and your breath. You're trying to get your head to kind of relax a little bit. We have all these muscles in our face, and a lot of them are very tense a lot. We have all these muscles in the back of our neck and head. And we got muscles all over our body, and many of them are tense. They're holding us up. And that's good. We need to be able to do that, be alert and awake and fight. But we also need to be able to relax those muscles. So what I have here is a very long list. And what I want to do is just do a couple of them. The simplest of them all, but the most fundamental and most important one is deep breaths. So if you can take a deep breath in for about 4 seconds and hold it for about 4 seconds. Go ahead and do that right now. Just hold it for about 4 seconds and let it out real slow, like 7 or 8 seconds. The exhale is the relaxation. The exhale is the parasympathetic part of this. The inhale is the sympathetic. It's the amping up. So if an athlete needs to perform, they're going to breathe in and in and in, and they're going to get all that oxygen and get all that energy, and then they're going to perform. But if you're trying to relax and calm down, it's the opposite. You got to breathe out more. So however you do your breathing, when you're trying to relax, emphasize the exhale. Spend more time with the let it all out. And that includes like loosen up your belly, loosen up the muscles, like let it all exhale. So deep breathing can be done anytime, anywhere. You can be quietly breathing deeply and people won't even know. And that's the power of it. But it just it activates this sympathetic part of your nervous system. Okay, another one that's funny is the wet noodle. And that's where you try to relax every muscle in your whole body. I won't do it right now because it's kind of embarrassing, because you literally have to just go totally limp. And you gotta scan through your body and let every muscle loose. And you can do it in a chair or the floor. You can't do it standing. I can't do it right now because I need certain muscles to hold me up. But wet noodle really is really interesting. In yoga, they call it the corpse pose. You lay there on the ground like a corpse, and it's very relaxing. Now, there's so many other ways. This is just one list. But I'll give you another one. I'll pick a couple out here. This one I learned a few years ago, and it kind of amazed me. It's called soft focus. So when I'm in the sympathetic nervous system, when I'm amped up, my eyes are, like laser beams. I'm very focused, and when I need to relax, I need the opposite. I need to soften my focus. So right now, if you can just soften your focus, what you're going to try to do is look at the whole room at once. Like, don't look at me, don't look at any particular thing. Just kind of soften your focus and let your eyes bring in the light and the images from all over the room. And take a deep breath, and that will help you calm down a little bit. But we don't realize sometimes just how our brow is furrowed and our eyes are like laser beams, solving problems, and it helps to take a deep breath, try to relax your body and soften your focus. That's going to have an effect on your nervous system. Walking is huge, especially outdoors. Moving both sides of your body, bilateral motion, it's super important. Yoga is fantastic. I did not think I would like yoga at all until I tried it and started doing it. We do it a few times a week, maybe 3 times a week in the evening to calm down and rest, and it helps, 10 minutes of it. And we like a lady called Adrienne, Yoga with Adrienne on YouTube. She's fantastic. Okay. One more off this list. I think it's on the front page there. Cold water on your face. That's, again, something easy you can do. Go to the bathroom, splash cold water in your face. That really helps a lot. You can maybe get on your wrists, cold water on your wrists and hands and face. Deep breath. Try to relax your muscles, and that will bring you, amp you down. It'll bring you down to a more relaxed state. Okay. Like I said, I'm not going to go over all these. The next page, actually, a couple of slides first. Okay, grounding is something that you can do when you're starting to feel really amped up and you're not feeling well, getting anxious. And what you can do very quickly, besides the deep breathing, is make sure your feet are on the ground and feel the ground, like kind of press into it. And then feel your hands, feel your knees, and try to be in your body as much as possible and be on the earth as much as possible. You can start naming things in the room. You can say what time it is. It's 9:48. It's a Saturday. I'm in this room with these nice people at Rooftop Church. My feet are on the ground. And you start to get in the moment, because so often we are off into space, thinking about things, worrying about things, solving problems. And we're in our heads so much that we're getting a little out of control. And so grounding really helps to get your feet on the ground, and be in your body, and be in the moment. Take that deep breath, get a little relaxation in you, and you can go to the next thing. This is really, really helpful, but it's really about using your 5 senses. Sometimes I'll feel my fingers, wiggle my toes, feel my tongue in my mouth, feel the air in my nose as I breathe, and that's getting back into my body. That's self-care, and that's actually going to help your emotions and your thinking as well. It slows things down and gets you into a better place. There is the handouts. It's the next one here, living in this moment. And again, I don't want to get into the details of it right now, but mindfulness is something that's biblical. So mindfulness gets a lot of its fame from Buddhism, okay, and from just modern science. There's a ton of studies that say modern mindfulness helps people, be emotionally regulated, be physically healthy. Tons of science behind mindfulness. But if you look at the Bible, there's a ton of verses talking about being present, not worrying about the future, not being in dismay about the past. Do today, do this moment. Let God take care of what's ahead of you. You don't need to look down the road all the time. So the analogy I use a lot with people is, think about in a car. If you're driving a car, good drivers pay very close attention to what's happening right now and in the next 100 yards, and just what they can see in front of them. They're paying attention to cars on the left coming in, cars on the right coming in, someone maybe coming from behind. So I'm checking the rearview mirrors, side view mirrors, but I am in this moment. I'm not mindlessly on the phone or listening, to doing, people sometimes multitask driving, and they're really not thinking about what they're doing. They're mindlessly driving a car 85 miles an hour down the highway. It's not good, it's not healthy. You don't want to spend all your time looking in the rearview mirror and thinking about the past. You don't want to spend all your time looking at your maps and thinking about where you're going. You can look at that quickly and you can look back as needed, but 99% of your time should be spent 2 hands on the wheel, paying attention, being safe, and you won't be in accidents. Good drivers are there in the moment. So I would encourage you to look at all these Bible verses and see that this idea of being in the moment, being present, being in your body, and just doing the next right thing is what Jesus did. He was present with people. People were always trying to trap him into mental, worries about the future and things that have happened in the past. And he was always saying, no, let's be here in the moment. Let's be body, mind, and soul present right now and do this thing, do this one thing. Okay. Connecting with people, super important. We're social beings, social creatures. We need people. It's not good for man to be alone. Jesus was with people all the time. He went off into solitary places to pray, to take care of himself, but he was with people a lot. And my recommendation is to do your best to find people who get it. And that's hard to find. But when you find someone who gets it, they know what it's like to suffer. They know what it's like to not be normal, to not have a normal family. If you can find one friend like that, it's so helpful. My wife has a friend like that. I have a friend like that, fortunately, and we're texting a lot. We're calling on the phone fairly often. I need someone who knows that it's hard. I need someone who knows that that life's messy and that okay. I need some sympathy, empathy, because empathy, they're with you in it. So, but here's the problem. It's difficult because we often get into this comparison trap. We're often comparing my pain to his, or her life is easier than mine, and that leads to nothing. Like, that's the thief of joy. That's not helpful at all. So you got to be careful with socializing with people. To be with people, to give and take emotionally with others as best you can, and realize that there's no good in comparing my pain to yours. That typically ruins relationships. But reach out to people. We need attachment. We need people. If we don't, we're going to suffer excessively. This wellness skills packet page is, I believe, number 4. And again, these are things you can do to reduce your anxiety, to reduce your depression. None of them are silver bullets, but you need to have a toolbox full of things you can do that are life-giving, things that will help you be a little more whole, a little more healthy inside. And so you need to be able to look at a list like this and say, yeah, I do some of these things, and I should probably try a few more things. You need 6 or 7 things in your toolbox. So it's always kind of scary when I get a client who really just doesn't have a clue how to care for themselves. And so I'll say, well, I bet you do some of these things. I bet they help you. And then maybe there's a few you can try. Like yoga was one I tried and I liked it, and it helps. It doesn't make everything better, but it sometimes makes my stress 10-20% better. Sometimes it helps me sleep better, and that's important. Okay, last bit here. Self-compassion. there are books written about self-compassion. But it really just comes down to this. You gotta be fair with yourself. You gotta be compassionate to yourself the way you're compassionate to a friend. Many of you guys are probably harder on yourself than you are on everybody else. And that's not fair, it's not healthy, and it's often rooted in shame. Like you don't feel like you're good enough. You don't feel like you're enough. And so you have to be careful to be fair with yourself. Yes, there's things that you do that are wrong. You sin, you make mistakes, you're guilty at times of, botching things. But it's really important not to say, I am wrong, I am the problem, I am worthless. You have to be careful, be fair, hold yourself accountable, seek to be a better person, but be compassionate and say, yeah, I'm human, I'm going to make some mistakes, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't wreck me, it doesn't define me. So you gotta root out the shame. The shame is destructive. Guilt is constructive. And the Holy Spirit convicts us of things and is leading us to a better way. And that's supposed to be constructive. It's building our soul, making us a better soul. So you gotta say things to yourself like, yeah, you're having a hard day. Yeah, it's really hard when you don't sleep well. It's really hard when your child is suffering. It's really hard. You've got a lot of stress. But you know what? Jesus had a stressful life and led a painful life, and he knows and he cares. And so you're talking to yourself, reminding yourself of the truth, renewing your mind with these compassionate but true things. It's not that you're being dismissive and permissive. You're not being too easy on yourself. That's not the idea. But be fair, be kind, treat yourself the way you treat others. And so I have this list that I think it's the last page on here, yeah. And these are truths that I speak to myself. You can pick and choose whichever ones you want and make your own list. And when I read these, man, it's hard not to feel better when I read these. These things are true things. Some of them are hard. Some of them are hard truths. They're not all pleasant, but they're true and they're good for me. They build my soul up, because my inner critic is often tearing me down, and the world is often tearing me down, and Satan would love to tear down my family and take me out. And so this is the renewing of my mind. This is speaking truth to myself in a compassionate, fair, honest way. For instance, I am human. I'm not a superhuman. I have strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to play to my strengths and I'm going to shore up my weaknesses, but I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm done with that. Man, when I read that and say it out loud like this, it just makes me feel so much better. Because it's all true, and it's helpful, and it's going to make me a better husband, father, etc. All right, well, I think we'll end with this. I know it's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. There's a lot of information here. But I wanted to give you guys my favorite handouts, the ones that have been most helpful to others and most helpful to myself. Manage your inner life so you're not swamped.
So, sorry, we went over a little bit because of tech issues and starting a few minutes late. So we are still going to have some discussion time, but we're going to shorten it by a little bit of time. And I failed to introduce myself and Katie, who have organized this. Katie and I are both parents of children with unique neurodiverse needs, and it was really on our heart to be able to bring information to you guys and also potentially have a follow-up community after this, which brings me to the sheets on your table. There's 2 different surveys. One was sent out last night in the reminder email just to see if you guys are interested in an additional or follow-up community with us, other parents within our community. And then the other one is just to give us some feedback about the survey or about the seminar, what we can change, if there's anything that you'd be interested in at later dates. I'm just really interested in your feedback. So I'm going to give about 10 minutes for people to ask Andy questions if you'd like. And then we're going to have a couple testimonies. Anybody have any questions?
I'll ask one.
Please.
So my son is 7. He was diagnosed with autism at 1.5 years. And he's had several health issues this year. He's had like 15 hospital admissions and like 10 going under procedures. So my biggest thing is remaining calm for him in the moment, but also I'm struggling with, how do I understand that he didn't understand why these things happened to him? Do you understand what I'm saying? So now I have to try to reiterate to him why the relevance and the importance of doing what we did was so important, but then he doesn't fully understand. But then when he gets upset, then I get upset because I've seen him upset from his health issues for so long. So I guess what I'm asking is that when you're in the moment and he's upset, my first reaction is to just react, right? Like as soon as something happens,
Stop
like
the
I'm
pain.
right there, you know what I mean? Like it pains me to see him upset. So I don't know how to handle myself so that I don't get flared
Yeah.
before I can help him. That's my question, I guess.
I'm going to defer to Marion. Because Marion is an expert at this. I have an answer, but
I
she's going to have a
am.
better
I am?
answer. Yes.
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think like a lot of times when we're working with kids, even kids with autism, is like, I always tell my parents, I'm like, make the implicit explicit. Because even kids with autism understand that something's going on, right? And a lot of the kiddos that I work with autism, like, they really do get it.
And I think that's my problem as a mom, and
Right.
that's why I feel so bad, is because I feel like he understands me to the extent of his understanding.
Absolutely.
But I want him to understand my way, but that's not how it works.
Well, and the thing is, like, we can always come back to our kids and be like, Mommy got really upset, didn't she? And you saw that, you know? And in those moments when we feel our most weak, they can be the most teachable moments to our kids because it's very tangible in that moment. And so it's like, can we step back after I have that moment of like, and I for lack of a better word, I freak out in front of my kid. I do it too all the time. I'm like, and my kid's like, And I'm like, okay, let's bring it back. Okay, well, I'll calm down now. I'm gonna step back for a second. Mommy's gonna calm down. Okay, I'm gonna enter in with you. I'm gonna calm you. And then as soon as we're regulated, then I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna be like, Mommy got mad. And I'm really sorry you saw that. And now how can I, and Mommy had to take these breaks to calm herself down. Sometimes it's those moments that can be the most teachable, if that makes sense, and if that answers your question.
Yeah.
So you're modeling
Yes.
the emotional regulation.
Yeah.
You're coaching by doing it with him.
Exactly.
You're being with him in the moment, being upset with him,
Yep.
feeling it all 100% with him.
Exactly,
Together.
and I even do that in the session with my clients where they're upset, and then I start feeling it, and I'm like, oh, I'm getting upset. Okay, I'm getting upset. Marion's gonna take some deep breaths right now. Can you take some deep breaths with me? And so it's even in those moments where we feel the most weak that can be the most teachable, if that makes sense. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that does.
And you're going to connect with your child more also. You're
Exactly.
with them, that attachment's going to happen, which he needs so much. And then you're going to model how to get upset and then recover.
Exactly.
And you're okay. It's okay to get upset and recover.
She specializes in children and adolescents in various areas, including, but not limited to, trauma, ADHD, learning disabilities, adoption, anger management, anxiety, behavioral issues, coping skills, depression, family conflict, oppositional defiance, and parenting. You will also hear, after this, you'll also hear from a couple of other Rooftopers' testimonies.
Thank you. As Erin said, I am Marion Wandel. I have been
practicing therapy for the past 10 years. This is my family. Rusty is my husband, and then Corey is my son. Corey isn't special needs, but he is highly sensitive, which is a trait, and that can make some things a little bit difficult as well. We did think that there was a possibility for autism as well. There's some pretty similarities between high sensitivity and autism. And so, though I don't walk the road to the length that most of you do, I can definitely sympathize. So, as I was preparing for this time, I was really feeling like praying and like, okay, Lord, help me know what to say and how to say it. And I really felt like the Holy Spirit was just giving me these words of wisdom, like these thoughts. And I'm like, yes, I am so excited to share with y'all. I'm so excited to share the love of Jesus and how he sees people with special needs and how to love them well. But as I was preparing last night, I was coming up to this idea, and I'm like prepping, and I'm like, wow, this sounds really condemning and really shaming. And if we walk away with shame and shoulds, we're not going to walk away with like an idea of how to work with our heart. We can shame and should ourselves until the day is long, but that creates behavioral change. So where I actually want to start today is compassion for self. Andy and I were jiving, man. I mean, like, we didn't even prep together. I'm like, Andy, stop taking my stuff. So, compassion for self. That's fourth and foremost. Because as we explore, even for those of us that don't have kids with special needs, we need to have compassion for ourselves for why it might be difficult for us to interact with that. And then we have to be curious as to why it's hard. Because again, if we shame ourselves, it's not going to really create this environment for us to learn and for us to enter in. And so if we want to enter in, we need to be compassionate for ourselves and curious for why it's hard. So as we walk through this time, I'm going to talk about the 3 things that are on your handouts. And at the end of each point, we're going to actually have dialogue. I realize I'm not preaching a sermon. I don't have to monologue up here. Y'all get to talk too. It's going to be great. So be ready. Be ready for that. So where we're going to start is actually in the book of Luke and Mark. We're going to start looking at Jesus and how he dealt with the marginalized, the forgotten. And so before we get to that, as Covenant Seminary says, context is king. So we're going to learn about the context of Luke so that we can have a deeper understanding for the scripture that we're about to read. It's a very well-known passage. It's going to be the passage of when the children come to Jesus. But let's talk about context. So my favorite commentary on Luke is Michael Card. Does anybody know the song El Shaddai? Amy Grant, come on. El Shaddai, I'll sing for you. And so he is actually the songwriter that wrote El Shaddai. Amy Grant's the one that made it famous. And so he talks a lot about biblical imagination. The Gospels are written for us to enter into the story, to imagine ourselves in the story so that we can experience it with them, right? And so Michael Card really takes us into an in-depth view. And Michael Card believes that, historically, doctors in the time of Jesus were usually slaves, and Luke was a doctor. So it's possible, not all theologians would agree with me, it's possible that Luke was actually a slave. It's also possible, some believe, not all, it's also possible that Paul purchased Luke. And one of the reasons why this is important is because the Gospel of Luke is inundated with the forgotten, the lowly. And it's inundated with Jesus interacting with them, interacting with women, interacting with children, interacting with shepherds. Luke is the only gospel that talks about the shepherds being the first people that the angels came to. Why? Because we think that Luke actually had a context of what it means to be the forgotten and the outcast. And Jesus, over and over and over again, interacts with the outcast, the marginalized, the forgotten. And remember, as we read this scripture, let's put that into our minds. Let's imagine that's the culture in which Jesus swims. Jesus swims in this culture where women are second-class citizens. Rabbis, not all of them, but rabbis wouldn't even talk to their own wives in public because of what that would look like. That is how marginalized women were. Infants and children were also very forgotten. So remember, these are the two forgotten people that we're about to read about in this scripture, okay? Let's go. Luke 18, 15 through 17. Now they were bringing even infants, to him that he might touch them. And when the disciples saw it, they rebuked them, which again, in the context of that day, was probably not unheard of. But Jesus called to them himself, saying, "Let the children come to me, and do not hinder them. For to such belongs the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it." Mark 10, 13 through 16. And they were bringing children to him that he may touch them, and the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the children come to me. Do not hinder them, for such belongs to the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it." And he looked at them, and he took them in his arms and blessed them, laying his hands on them. So now that we have the context of the scripture, let's also talk about the context of attachment. Y'all, you got me at my best. I'm like, let's talk about attachment and Jesus. Let's put the two together. Let's rock. So attachment is when we are connected to each other, right? It means I'm feeling you, you're feeling me. We talk about right brain connecting to right brain. Right brain is the feeling side of our brain. So I'm connecting my right brain to your right brain. I'm feeling with you. I'm jiving with you. I see you. Right? I not only do I see you, but I feel you. So it's like that, and not only do I feel you, but I'm with you, right? And so that's attachment. It's that desire of like, I'm with you, I experience you, and I want to be with you. That's attachment. And so actually attachment, think about it in this acronym, ARE, can really be experienced in these three ways: accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. So if we want to really champion attachment for special needs families in our church, we really want to take these 3 points and really figure out how to apply them in our scenario. Does that make sense? So, what we see in this scripture is that Jesus was accessible. Accessible means that you can get to me. Accessible means that I am here for you. Just think about even the most simplistic way. Accessible means that we have ramps to our church so that we can get wheelchairs into our building. It's accessible. And in the same way, accessibility in relationship means I'm here with you and you can get to me. And so Jesus was accessible to these women and children. He was accessible to them. They came to him and the walls were up, the barriers were up. You are not welcome here. And Jesus said, the barriers are up, and you are. And so the children were able to come to him, so much that he could touch them, which again, think about the stereotypes of that day. That's a huge deal, y'all. Holding these children in his arm is a huge deal. And so he touched them and he was with them. Jesus stood up for them so that he could be with them. He was accessible to them. So now this is where we get to dialogue. We're going to be compassionate for ourselves and curious about why. Let's be compassionate. But what do you think is at the heart that makes it so hard to be accessible? To be accessible to others, to be accessible to families with special needs?
Before we answer.
Yeah.
Fear.
Fear, yeah. Fear of?
Fear of not knowing how.
Yes. Fear of not knowing how.
I think it's fear of failure too. Like
Yes.
you want to help, you try, and then you mess it up because you don't really know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like that feeling.
Vulnerability.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Accessible buildings are expensive.
Yes. Yes, they are.
We need to add an elevator to this building, but it's almost $200,000.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah. Look, this is honest. Very honest.
Time.
Time. What do you mean? Like, can we dig into that a little bit?
Oh, just like everyday rush of life.
Yes.
Also just time like in our heads, like how we mentally think through time.
Yes.
Like in the future versus now.
Absolutely. It's always like, there's one thing after another. Yeah.
I was just going to piggyback on that, 'cause I feel like my world is always consumed with my world. And
Yeah.
there's so much of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to get to anybody else's world.
Exactly. How much are we just not accessible to our own family, right?
And sacrifice.
Yeah. Exactly. It takes time, it takes sacrifice. I'm not as accessible to my family as I wish I was.
Willingness.
Yeah. The ability to. Yeah. How do you think as a church community we can become more accessible? And this is actually where I would love to hear. I don't have answers for your church.
Voices in action.
Voices in action? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so just like using the Word of God with everyone and explaining the importance of what He's done for all of us and the reasons why we are the way we are.
Yeah.
And then, what was the other thing I said?
Voices in action.
Just how we show our love and our care for them, and that they should be, I shouldn't even say they, but everyone should be treated equally no matter what.
Yes. Yes. So that we can be able to teach to all, so that all can
Because
understand.
God loves everyone.
Because God
and
loves everyone.
everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think breaking down the barriers to extinguish that fear. I think that a lot of times, even myself, when I come across one who I'm not used to seeing, I wouldn't know how to respond to Andy's daughter with cerebral palsy. I've never met anyone personally with cerebral palsy. So breaking those barriers, explaining what this means and what they're truly going through, what the diagnosis is, having practical training so that there's not a mystery behind it.
Yeah.
I think that would better prepare us to know how to respond and how to greet and how to be in community.
Yeah. So like, it's almost like, if I'm hearing you correctly, the humility of learning and the humility to learn. Even if we do have kids with special needs, there are even special needs that we ourselves don't understand. And then how do we humble ourselves to learn and become accessible to them? Yeah. It's really good.
I think sometimes just entering into hard conversations.
Yes.
Just starting the conversation, because like going back to the accessibility, the time thing of there's so many different people with so many different situations.
Yeah.
It's hard to know where to start, but it's like if you're seeing individuals in your community, in your space, like just starting that conversation of like, what can I do? How can I be helpful? What are you needing? And that always seems to go better than not.
Yes.
And with that willingness to listen too.
Yes.
Yeah. What I'm really hearing in those comments is vulnerability. The vulnerability to humble ourselves, to learn, and to ask. And that can be really, really scary because it means that we have to be okay with not knowing. Yeah.
I think that we all kind of put boundaries between ourselves in a way that it's the fear of approaching someone who's got a child with special needs, assuming that they don't want to talk about it, assuming that they're going to be sad when you ask about it, and assuming that you're ill-equipped to help that parent.
Yes.
And I think that once those boundaries and barriers are erased in some manner, then people are going to be less fearful to share and ask and talk. One of the most meaningful conversations that I remember when we were in the old building, and I'm now friends with this person, her son came in with noise reduction earmuffs on, and we didn't know what was going on with Kensley at this point, but we knew that sound triggered her. And I walked up to her and I just said, can you tell me about this? How does this help your son? And I learned so much from her, and she was so excited that someone asked her, and she was able to use her knowledge to teach somebody else, which ended up helping us with Kensley before we knew anything.
Can I just say too that as a special needs mom, I really appreciate when people ask me about Charlie. I want people to ask because then they understand. And it doesn't hurt my feelings or anything like that. I like talking about, people love talking about themselves. But, you know, I like talking about it, and I like for people to know what's going on. You know, why is she doing that? I would love to explain to you why.
Yeah.
Please do ask, you
Yes.
know?
Instead
Absolutely.
of saying my child has X, Y, and Z, and then they come back to you and say, I'm sorry. Sorry for what? This is, you know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, I'm excited. I'm actually gonna get to that. I'm excited. So actually, let's go to the next point, because this is all good. We're gonna discuss all three together. This is gonna be fun. So Jesus was responsive. Responsive in attachment means that I see that you have a need and I'm gonna meet you in that need. So that's responsiveness. So responsive in attachment with our kiddos would mean like, I see that you're tantruming, and so I'm gonna sit down with you and I'm gonna be with you in this moment. Responsiveness means I see that you're hungry, I'm gonna feed you. Like if we're gonna we can make it pretty simplistic as well. And as we see, like, Jesus was responsive to the children, but also to the moms that were actually trying to bring their children to Jesus in that moment. Because in Hebrew, I'm not gonna say it correctly, baraka is, it to them would be like a blessing. Blessing also would mean prophecy. If I'm saying this, anybody, feel free to correct me. But, so the idea is that when rabbis would bless children, it would also be an extent in which they would be asking for a prophecy over their child. And so can you imagine, like, oh, there's this rabbi and he's getting all this clout and he's having all this following. If he could just put his hand on my child and prophesy over them, like, how much would that bring down my anxiety? How much would that help me feel better, right? How much so do we do that in our own world? Like, if I can get them into these services, if I can get them into this therapy, if I can, like, help me understand that my child is okay. And what Jesus was doing, how he was responding to these women, was he was responding to them and, like, letting them know, I've got, your children are okay. And so that, when we think about responsiveness, let's be curious and, like, compassionate to ourselves. And again, why do you think it might be hard to respond to some of the needs for families that have special needs kiddos? Why do you think that might be hard for us? We're going to be compassionate and curious. Yeah.
I think Andy touched on this too. It's, you know, that people, whether you want to admit it or not, you're always like thinking, well, there's somebody else who has it worse, and if I like share with someone, I'm going to look more insensitive to what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Because caring, you know, you want it to be like reciprocal, and it's just,
yeah,
you don't feel like almost on the same
right
level. And you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't know.
Right. Because you don't want to be like, try to respond and then be like, I don't have it as bad. Like, how do I interact with that? Yeah. Andy.
I think a lot of people are worried about they're saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
There's a language in our world, you know, and the language changes every 10 years, it seems like, you know, where, you know, intellectual disabilities versus developmental disabilities, you know, we've got all these words and people are afraid to say the wrong word or say something insensitive.
Right.
And it's just one of many reasons why I think people are afraid to get into it, because they know they could step on a landmine, say the wrong thing the wrong way, and upset someone.
Exactly. That's really good.
Rejection.
Yes.
It goes with that a little bit too. It's like maybe workplaces don't know how to handle certain types of situations.
Right.
For families going through it. And
Yeah.
so they don't know what to say. Yeah. So it just kind of creates like weirdness, awkwardness.
Like a barrier in that, in the way of like, if I step out and I'm like, can I help you? You're making yourself, I keep saying this word, vulnerable to it. And so if I step out and I'm like, okay, let me help you, and they're like, no. It's like, that can feel scary to us, right? How about as a church body, how can we be responsive?
Pray with them.
Pray with them.
I almost want to say, what about trying to like form almost like a partnership too, of like the people that are watching your kids during service, you know, hey, I noticed this about, you know, your child this week, or, you know, hey, I saw this about that happen and I was so encouraged by this.
Yeah. So like being able to enter in and be like, hey, I'm noticing these things, and yeah, that's great. Let's keep going.
Oh, events like this.
Yeah, events like this. There you go. Yes.
And a follow-up community.
And a follow-up community. Let's go. Let's go.
I'm gonna say real quick too, just opening those lines of communication.
Yes.
So, making it clear and transparent that maybe me as your Sunday school teacher inquiring, how can I be helpful? Is there a specific need that I can address? What is the language you use with your child to help break these barriers, to help them see through these tough emotions?
Yeah.
Fill in the blank, inquiring, just asking how can I be helpful?
Right. And I think like a lot of the times, again, we're talking about like just starting the conversation. I think that is like, it's almost that first step, right? Like everyone's like, the first step to change is the hardest. And it's like, it's one of those things that's like, okay, just making the first step to that conversation can go a long way. Yeah. So Jesus was engaging. And so engagement, think about it as like empathetic, understanding. So I'm going to sit here with you in your emotions. I'm going to feel your emotions with you. I'm going to engage with you. So that would be like, that would be engaging. So I could sit here and be empathetic with y'all till the day is long. I could feel you. I could be like, oh, I feel your emotions. I'm with you. But full attachment happens when I respond, right? When I respond to that need. So it's having all three together. So I'm empathetic, I'm feeling with you, and I'm responding. Does that make sense? So how we see Jesus really engaging is, first of all, he was indignant. And indignant means feeling or showing anger or annoyance at what is perceived as unfair treatment. He knew in that moment that as the disciples were putting up the barriers to not make him accessible to him, that he knew that that was not okay. He knew. And he felt that it was an unfair treatment. And so what did he do? He opened up the barriers. He felt indignant. He felt those emotions with them. And then what did he do? He laid hands on them. He engaged them. He held these infants in his arms and blessed them. He engaged them. And in the same, yeah.
I don't want to interrupt your momentum.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that is the only time that word is used of Jesus in the Gospels.
Yes.
And it's in the context of defending children.
Yes.
Which I think is significant.
Yeah. It's really funny. Also, the context is that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for his death. And he is absolutely inundated with a bunch of people following him. So he has tons of people following him. And then he's even like, and he knows what's coming, right? He knows it's coming, it's right there. And he still wants the children to come to him. That's really funny. And in his commentary, Michael Card says, I want to imagine that in that moment, as Jesus was holding these children, he needed that comfort just as much. Sorry, I love Jesus. I love attachment. I'm just like, let's go.
Marion,
Yeah.
I think it's also, we often get this beautiful pastoral picture of these beautiful, clean children. And in reality, these are dirty, snotty kids.
Yes.
In his lap, and
Yes.
he's engaged with the mess.
Yes.
And I like that. That he wasn't afraid to touch a diseased person.
Yes.
Get on the ground in the dirt and be with these people in their mess.
But that's how they look in the pictures in the drawings.
Flowing in.
Right out of the bathtub.
Right? I mean, think about it. Like, they're on the road to Jerusalem. It's gross.
Right.
It's gross, and these children are probably not clean. It's good insight. Thank you. So, wanted to share a little bit about myself. I was going through a really hard time. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she didn't know how to engage. And so, this is an acronym I created for myself. I call it WIC-WUS, Well-Intentioned Christians with Unhelpful Sayings. So, how many times do we not know how to interact with the pain of another person. So because we don't know how to interact with that, because we don't know how to hold, guys, it's just simply holding the space. Like that in and of itself is powerful. Holding the space of the pain. And a lot of times we don't know how to, so we give a wick wuss. And we're like, well, Jesus can't give you more than you can bear. And I'm like, that's not biblical. Another thing, like, God, you know, He's with you, and you read the scripture, and you're like, this is so not helpful. You are putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. And what I need you to do is hold this space with me. Like Jesus held this space with these kids and these moms. And so, one thing that I was talking, I have a friend, her name's Deanne, she's also a child therapist, and I was talking about coming here, and she laughs, and she's like, well, yeah, because she also had a kid that was pretty sick. And she's like, you know, one of the worst things that anybody said to me as I was like sitting in church is like, at least he was able to make it that day. At least. And how often that comment just really like made her feel unseen. It's not an at least. You know, it's really hard. Yeah.
One of the statements that I get all the time, considering my background, is God gave her to you for a reason because you know all of this stuff. No.
Yes.
This is like the first time I've had to deal with this in a completely different perspective. I am not fully equipped for this.
Yes.
And it just, like, people just assume that I will be able to do everything and know all and everything's going to be great. And
that was my question literally on here that I was going to be asking.
Yeah.
She just said, like, is there truth to God giving my child with special needs for a reason?
Right.
And I'm only saying that because when I was younger, my best friend was blind.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, mentally I'm thinking, okay, he did because I went through it, right? Because I like lived, but is that really true?
Right. And I wish I could.
Did he really?
Right, and I wish we could answer that question. It goes back to the scripture that Andy had, which was like, well, who sinned first? In the way it's like, is this really? And the answer is like, I don't think we know. I think it can strengthen us and build us and sanctify us, but did God give us because it was, I don't know.
Or can you, because you can handle it.
Right.
He gave it to you because he knows you can handle it. Like
Right.
I met you
He
just
knows he
now.
can handle it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just didn't know how to respond to people when they say that. I don't know.
Smile and nod and go, okay.
Yeah.
So again, let's be compassionate to self and curious about why. What makes it hard to engage? I think we've been discussing a lot of this, but I wanted to hear if anybody has any other thoughts. Or how can we engage as a church body?
Aren't you supposed to tell us that, Marion? Just kidding, just kidding.
The pressure's
I think
on.
something that we often struggle with, and I struggle with this in my fostering community too, is that the people who are experiencing and having the children with special needs are the only ones that really get what we need.
Yes.
And so, but we're so busy dealing with the challenges of our family that it's hard to have more margin to reach out and to do more than what we're doing.
Right, because just doing what you're doing on the day-to-day basis is hard enough. Imagining to actually have to reach out is also really hard.
Or create space for kids here, you know.
Yeah.
Or to staff that space for
Yeah.
that.
To give that, to become accessible. Yeah.
I want to say too that I think that like, I think parents in general feel that way. Of any children.
Yeah.
They feel like I'm taking care of this. This is a lot.
Yeah.
And you know, wherever your kids are at, it always feels like a lot.
It does. There's truth to that. Absolutely. And so it's a lot. It can be really overwhelming.
So, but I think we adapt more than we know or want to know, because I'm sure that you've stretched and grown as you needed to.
Yeah. And so maybe if I'm hearing correctly, push back if I'm not, is that how do people like myself who don't have a kids with special needs reach out in a way that doesn't make it feel like more work? I don't know, is that, where it's like, okay, you know, I don't know, thoughts?
Like you're doing it just because you feel you have to.
It's not genuine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a little perspective on, like, I go both sides because I work in kids ministry, but also have kiddo with, like, you want, and I think sometimes for me, it's letting go of, and I'm still working with it, like, I'm not saying I've mastered this by any means, but like realizing that I need to let go of being able to fix it, being able to do it all, being able to have the plan and have the solution, and just enter into, I can step into a situation and go, you know what, I don't know, I don't know how to fix that, and it, like you said again, like being vulnerable in that moment.
Yes.
Vulnerable in that space with them, but just being like, I'm with you.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I want to help. I want to make a difference, but I don't know how yet.
Exactly. That's exactly what that is, engagement. Engagement is exactly that. Yeah.
So I'm kind of going back just a little bit, but one of the things that was said today is that people have the fear of saying and doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And then we also talked about how hard it can be to hear the wrong thing. People say to us things that make us cringe.
Yes.
And so I think part of bringing this together is leaving room for people to screw it up.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
offering that grace.
Yes.
Even if it's hard to hear, and really feeling that when the appropriate time is to have a conversation with them, help them grow through that. Or,
exactly.
But yeah, I know. I've seen even just on social media and stuff, people post about how people said the wrong thing to them in the grocery store, or I have adopted children, and so that's a lot of my community, and so that always makes me cringe when people are, my friends who are adopted parents are telling about experiences in a public platform because somebody said the wrong thing, and that scares people.
Yeah.
So they don't want to say anything.
Right.
And so
it's almost a mutual vulnerability is what I'm hearing you say, like a mutual vulnerability to ask and enter in, and then a mutual vulnerability on the other end to be like, I know that you mean well, but that wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's this dance almost of like, so it can be really scary, so we don't want to enter in at all. But then the reality is like, if we want to experience true attachment and connection with there has to be this dance of, I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, how, and that mutual back and forth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about telling you how to parent? Like, I just feel like people that like to tell you, like my mother, I'm not saying not to hang her out, but that will say, well, he's just being stubborn. Okay, well, with autism, it's not just being stubborn. And there's a way you have to go about this, but when you explain it to her, she's just not getting it.
Right.
And I think that's even harder on the person still going through it, because what do you do for them to get it?
Right. And I think it comes back to that, like, calming self down and then finding a good time to have that conversation. And again, it's like that ebb and flow of, how do I put myself out there? Like, this isn't helpful, and I think it takes some wisdom into knowing how to handle it.
And that goes with anyone, because what if somebody says something and then they get scared to say anything to you ever again?
Right.
They're scared, like, oh.
Right.
Okay.
And then now we're seeing why it is so hard to enter into the conversation
now they're
at all.
like drifting apart from you.
Right.
Instead of coming to
Yes. Exactly. So, I know this is a lot of information, and usually I know at this point in the of a talk, a lot of us start to like zone out, or a lot of us start to disassociate, and we're thinking about, oh, what time is it, and how are we gonna get out of here on time, and I have all the things. So what I wanted to do before I close out is I want us all to just take a deep breath together. So I'm gonna do what Andy suggested. See, Andy, we've got it.
Wet noodle on the ground?
Yeah, right, here we go. So I want to just to, even if you feel safe enough, just to close your eyes. And I want you just to breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Breathe out. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Breathe out. And if you have your eyes closed, I want you just for this 1 minute, we're not going to take long, but I want you just for this 1 minute to imagine if you have a child with special needs, I want you to imagine your child. I want you to imagine that you're that mom bringing him to Jesus. Saying, Jesus, bless my child. Because he will. Jesus sees you. All right, I just want us to take another deep breath. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Breathe out.
When it comes to handling everything, we all make sacrifices. Charlie's the one who has to live it every day. She doesn't have any friends. I know she sees the other kids play without her. She doesn't know how to tell me when she feels sad, but I know it hurts. I know she feels out of place. I know she wants to talk, and I know she wants to tell me about her day. I've never met anyone in my life who's stronger than my little girl. She's a firecracker and she's strong-willed. All that she deals with every day, and she still maintains a smile on her face. She has an amazing sense of humor. As an example, yesterday her teacher, Laura, sent me a text message, and I'll read it because it's epic. She said, "Your daughter's making me laugh today." The boy next to her let one rip really loud, twice. It was so loud. And in the sweetest voice, Charlie goes, "Toot toot," and then blew a raspberry with her mouth and did a lean over kind of like he did. We were rolling. Then she went to the library and out of nowhere made the fart noise again and said, "Toot toot." So she says toot toot and then blows a raspberry. She's mocking that boy's fart. Sorry, but we needed this on a Friday. She's awesome. She's hilarious. It's the little things that most people ignore and that are the things that light up her world. And when she smiles, it makes everything worth it. With all that being said, I wouldn't change a thing. Every one of us is stronger because of Charlie. Every one of us has become a better person because of her. And every bit of it is what God intended. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was actually my inspiration for this event and for even thinking about starting a special needs ministry. Because of the separation and the isolation with special needs families, they're really lacking the opportunity to live in community with one another and to be one with Christ. So thank you so much for sharing and being so transparent. Liza, I believe you had a little something to share as well.
Man, that's a hard act to follow.
Liza, do you want a mic?
I don't need a mic. I'm good. Andy, I want to thank you for everything that you shared. A lot of it is things that I've been aware of, but it's definitely a work in progress every minute. So I'm Liza, and I'm here to talk about my family, obviously. So I have 5 kids, and 3 of them have been diagnosed with ADHD. One of them has, well, several of them have anxiety. One of them has depression. I've dealt with anxiety and depression in my life. And for those of you who know my family, you might think of some other person that is also very busy and brilliant, which is the way I look at ADHD. So I've got a lot of busy and brilliant in my house. Anyway, I have a son named James, and he, along with ADHD, he has some other challenges. He has the burden of having been drug exposed in utero, and that affects his nervous system in that he is always on high alert. So he is never far away from the fight, flight, or freeze situation. I didn't expect so many people to be here this morning. I'm a little thrown off. Yeah, so James, he is also transracially adopted. So he also is dealing with being in a predominantly white space. His school is more diverse than our church, but we're here a lot, and it's mostly white, and he just gets a lot of attention from being different, which he does not deal well with. He does not want attention. He does not enjoy attention. So at home, we see a lot of the fight response. There's a lot of throwing things, hurting people, that kind of thing. Mostly when he hears no. So that's a challenge. He also shows a lot of anxiety at home. So he sleeps with his lights on. He doesn't play outside unless there's a sibling or a parent with him. And he's 9, so he's a little bit, should be past that, I feel like. So through this, like Elizabeth was saying, God has refined our family. He's refined our lives. He has refined me. One of the things that I've learned a lot about is de-escalation, right? I grew up in a home where escalation was sort of the norm, and so if you're gonna yell at me and be disrespectful, then I'm gonna yell at you, and we're all gonna yell at each other. And I tried that parenting for a while. It didn't really work. I have been trained in something called TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. And the basic idea of that is what is the need behind the behavior, right? And that's sort of what Andy was talking about. What are our needs? What's my need? What's his need? And how can we meet those needs? And being aware of the moment, being aware of what I'm feeling, being aware of what James is feeling. Just on Thursday, my husband's been out of town all week, and Jason is, our rock, and he's James's best friend. And so this week he was gone, and James had a meltdown, and it involved throwing things, and culminated in him sitting on the windowsill threatening to throw himself out the window. So, I mean, what I say in here stays in here, right? There's a camera, right? So, I hate to share this with you guys because I don't want my son to have this stigma, because he's brilliant, because he's hilarious, he's inventive and tenacious, and it's that tenacity that's going to help him to overcome these things. But yeah, we had a rough week, and last night I dropped him off with his birth grandmother, and she was speaking truth and love to me and saying, you've got to hold his feet to the fire. And so there's this balance between seeing the need, meeting the need, but then you also said boundaries, right? These are things that can't happen. These are things that we don't behave this way, because as a black man in America, if my son goes out into public at all and starts throwing things or threatens someone, he could die. It's just that simple. And I have dealt with having no boundaries for a very long time, and I've gotten better and better and better at having boundaries. And this is my hopefully penultimate challenge. I don't know. God might have something down the road for me, but I feel like balance of boundaries while meeting needs is the biggest challenge of having these children in our home, right? And being able to give them what they need while also teaching them appropriate ways to ask for it, appropriate ways to navigate those big emotions, you know. And so that is what God has been teaching me. God's really funny. So for a really long time, I've been substitute teaching, looking for a full-time job. And he gave me a job this year, and I'm teaching in Lindbergh, which typically has less needs than most districts. But I am doing intervention, math intervention, and so I have all my people. All my kids that don't know how to learn and have challenges with that. But they also have challenges with, you know, impulse control and, you know, just navigating life. And God gives me people, you know, and I'm sure he does that for you guys too. But he leads us, right? And he is with us as we journey this difficult journey. And that's all I've got.
My name is Leslie Ellis, and I was asked to share my story today that's a little bit different than the other ones that have been shared. Mine doesn't involve my own child, and it also actually started about 80 years ago. But I want to show the relevance between how things were back then with special needs and how kind of some things are still the same, unfortunately. My Aunt Carol was born in 1942, and she was what was called a blue baby, or also referred to as a anoxic, which means there was some sort of traumatic brain injury that caused a lack of oxygen. And she was mentally retarded from birth. And the first 12 years, she was at home with my grandparents, and they really struggled to take care of her because 80 years ago, there were no resources, whether you had physical or mental issues. There weren't any resources like there are now. And so they were on their own, and you really didn't get very much help from anybody outside your own home back then. And my aunt, like many people like her, had great physical strength. So it was very challenging for my grandma to take care of her. My grandma was only like 5 feet tall. So it was a challenge for my grandma to take care of her. And at the age of 12, my grandparents had to make the decision to put her in a residential facility. And she lived there for the next 66 years until April 1st of last year when she passed away. And when they had to make that decision, that was something that weighed very heavily on them. And very, very much so for the rest of their life. It was a very difficult thing for them. And they were judged for that. And I myself have been judged and shamed on their behalf because of what they did. And I was asked a lot of why questions. Why did they put her there? Why couldn't they take care of her? Why couldn't they keep her at home? But like I said, back then you didn't have the resources for any kind of assistance. My aunt, she didn't speak, and she never spoke. And she communicated by hitting and biting and slapping and pinching and spitting and things of that nature. Her entire life, that's the way she communicated, no matter if she was happy or sad or sick or hurt, it didn't matter. That was the only way that she knew how to communicate. She had the mental capacity of a toddler, and she could understand simple commands like take your plate to the sink or it's time to go to bed. But that was really the only thing she could understand. She also had something called SIB, which is self-injurious behavior, where she would scratch herself and bite herself until she bled. She always had scars and open sores because of that. She also had something called pica, which is where you eat non-food items. So it might be grass or rubber bands, it could be anything she could get her hands on, and that's what she would eat. So she had to have 24/7 care. She couldn't be left alone, ever. And like a lot of people with special needs, she had a lot of other health conditions, diabetes, seizures, heart problems, you name it. And she had it, was on tons of medication because of it. And those around her also needed to be protected from her because you never knew when she was going to lash out and hit somebody or scratch somebody or bite somebody. And I officially and legally became my aunt's guardian almost 25 years ago, and was her guardian until she passed away last year. My mom and I were guardians, and then when my mom passed away, I was the sole guardian. And, needing to make, as those with special needs know, making major life and medical decisions for your person is very, very difficult and weighs heavy on you to make sure you make the right decisions. My decisions weren't always popular with other family members, but I made the decisions that I thought were the right thing for my aunt based on talking to her doctors and nurses. And a couple of years ago, she became ill and she was in and out of the hospital for about 3 months, at which time she was diagnosed as terminal. And during one of her hospital stays, we had a really bad experience where the staff treated her so poorly. They treated her like she didn't exist. They didn't show her any dignity or respect. And I told her repeatedly that she couldn't speak, she couldn't communicate with them, but because she couldn't tell them what was wrong or what she needed or she was in pain or anything, they were just very unkind to her. And I went to the head of the hospital and demanded that she be moved to another floor, and she was treated much better at that point. But that's just one example of how people with special needs can be treated like they're invisible, like they don't exist, and they're not given the dignity that they deserve. Now, my own personal observations have shown me that there's a lot of good and a lot of bad with the way people with special needs are treated. Hopefully most people are compassionate, and that's been the experience that most people are compassionate, but there are those that aren't. And there are still those that, even this day and age, make fun of people and call them names. And one of the worst things for me is when somebody calls somebody a retard. That's something I can't bear that when I hear somebody do that. And since my aunt lived in a residential facility and not with me, I didn't have 24/7 care of her. So we had to make sure or hope that where she was safe. She lived in the same place for 66 years, and we could only hope and pray that she was safe and that she was well taken care of and she wasn't hurt or abused or anything, but that's all we could do was just hope and pray that that was the case. So I'm going to finish with, of all places, that a church is where somebody should feel safe and respected and loved, no matter how they are or whether they have any issues. And I know a lot of people, and I know this from personal experience, you don't know how to interact with somebody who is different. And it's okay that you don't know how to interact. And you start by observing how somebody else around you is interacting with somebody with special needs. And as Elizabeth said, it's hurtful when somebody doesn't acknowledge your special needs person. So one of the best things you can do is ask about them, say you're praying for them, tell their caregiver that you're praying for them, and just let them know that their person matters. Thank you.